And it's a beautiful evening here on the USS Midway. You can see that. Hi, I'm Peggy Pico.
Yes, it is a lovely evening. I'm Dwayne Brown. Welcome to a special broadcast of KPBS Evening Edition. We're on the deck of the USS Midway Museum, right next to the downtown waterfront.
That's right. You can hear the final call here. The Midway is hosting a remembrance of the Fall of Saigon. At the end of the Vietnam War, this aircraft played an important part in the last days on April 1975. And this weekend, it will be a gathering place for those who were there.
Yes, it will also be a place to remember the more than 58,000 Americans who died in Vietnam. Their names are engraved on the Vietnam War Memorial in Washington, D.C., and on replicas traveling the country.
And one of those memorials is now on the Midway. KPBS reporter Taryn Minto followed its journey today.
It's called The Wall That Heals, and it's traveled to more than 400 communities over the past 20 years. Now, this isn't the first time that it has visited San Diego, but it is the first time that it will be here on the deck of the USS Midway. The traveling wall rode in with an entourage. Dozens of veteran and active duty service members escorted the truck carrying The Wall That Heals. Leading the pack was Vietnam vet Billy Lamoury, who came to visit a name on the wall that he's never seen before.
James Donald Rad, but he always goes by Donald.
The childhood friends served at the same time, but in different parts of Vietnam, so they exchanged letters.
I was in Vietnam at the time, and I wrote him a letter, and I got it sent back to me, and it was stamped deceased.
After missing the funeral so many decades ago, the escort was a way to pay tribute.
He was a great guy. I mean, I grew up playing baseball with him and everything.
Rab's name is one of 58,000 U.S. service members listed on panels in the back of Rick and Donna Foates' truck. Donna, a veteran herself, says she was honored to carry the names of fathers, sons, and even some daughters.
Just being in the military and knowing what these guys did to sacrifice for us, it's to me, I'm sorry, it's emotional.
After the pair pulled up to the USS Midway, active duty service members took over the honor. Private Regan Lessescherer and his fellow Miramar Marines pieced together the 250-foot wall on the deck of the retired aircraft carrier. He says he's seen the power of the wall on his own uncle, a Vietnam veteran who faced harsh treatment when he returned from one of the nation's most unpopular wars.
And he was spit on by a civilian and was told some really nasty things. And for a while, he was very reserved about his involvement in the Vietnam War.
But he opened up after seeing the wall in Washington, D.C. years later.
It took like 25 years for him to finally come to terms that he shouldn't be afraid to, be afraid of the war that he fought in.
It's got to go down on this, and then you slide it into the future ones, okay?
Tim Tates with the Vietnam Veterans Memorial Fund says the traveling version brings the same solace to veterans and families, but in their own hometowns.
The mere presence, the ability to reach out and touch that name and to grasp that and have those emotions that come with it, at times is very painful, and at times brings tears to many grown men's eyes. But then you start to have that healing, and you start to have those laughter and those stories, and that's what it can do when it comes into a community.
For many, like Lamoury, the laughter and healing comes 40 years after the loss.
That's always been on my mind for all these years, and I said, well, this time I'm going to go down with the wall and bring it down here to the Midway and honor him.
And that's the story behind just one of the 58,300 names on the wall. Starting tomorrow, the wall will be open for 24 hours for free through Thursday. The Vietnam Veterans Memorial Fund is actually right now raising funds to purchase a new one. Taryn Minto, KPBS News.
And as Taryn said, that wall, the Wall That Heals, opens to the public tomorrow at 10 a.m. with a ceremony at 11.
And there will be honors ceremonies every morning and evening right through the morning of April 30th. We've got the schedule at kpbs.org. Now, thousands of Americans and Vietnamese were airlifted from Saigon before the North Vietnamese Army rolled into the city.
Yeah, a small group of Marine security guards led that evacuation. KPBS Patty Lane brings us the story of those last hours and the last man out.
PSUs were protective service units. These are the Marines that serve the ambassador.
It's been almost 40 years since U.S. Marine veterans John J. Valdez and Doug Potratz were side by side in Vietnam.
Yeah, this is me with the glasses.
Both were stationed as security guards at the U.S. Embassy in Saigon, where they helped evacuate thousands of people during the final hours of the war. Today, Valdez has invited Potratz into his home in Oceanside. Memorabilia from the war surrounds them. A map of Vietnam above the fireplace. Pictures of their unit taped to the mantel. The two men look through boxes of photos, many taken by Valdez, as the historic airlift known as Operation Frequent Wind was underway.
People were panicky. They really didn't know exactly what was taking place.
As the non-commissioned officer in charge of the Marines guarding the embassy, Valdez would be the last Marine out of Saigon, the last one to step off the embassy roof onto the last helicopter carrying people out.
As the North Vietnamese started moving closer into Saigon, it seems that all the villages and cities on the outlying areas, all the people started coming towards Saigon, the main road that led to Saigon.
Valdez's pictures capture the chaotic scene unfolding in front of them. A helicopter landing on the embassy roof. Evacuees lining up to board, people attempting to breach the embassy compound.
Eventually, we winded up with thousands and thousands of people that surrounded the embassy. They thought that that was their safe haven. It appeared that way, that that's the only way that they could get out. A lot of people didn't know why people were running or coming, but they were just following each other.
It's me on the vehicle gate. That's me right there.
For Doug Potratz, the war and its final hours made the 21-year-old South Dakota native grow up quickly.
And the people were so scared. I felt so sorry for them. I wish we could have gotten some more out, but we just couldn't. At some point, the helicopters had to stop.
Potratz, Valdez, and the rest of their unit coordinated evacuations, manned the gates, and destroyed classified embassy documents. Eventually, they retreated to the rooftop, where they waited for hours before the final helicopter arrived for them. Potratz says from that vantage point, they could see how the city was unraveling below.
It looked like the end of the world, because I had never seen looting before, and they were literally looting the building that we were in, and they were looting the compound that we were in. People were running around, stealing cars, driving off. There was smoke, there were bombs all going off and everything, and it looked like the end of the world. Yeah, it was the death of the city. And then when we got on the ship, we found out later that they renamed the city Ho Chi Minh City. Yeah. So Saigon had died that day, died literally right in front of us, hours before the communists came into the city and renamed it. We saw it dying in front of us. I didn't think we'd ever go back.
But 40 years after the fall of Saigon, Potratz, Valdez, and other members of their unit are heading back to Vietnam. They'll place a commemorative plaque at the site of the former embassy to honor two fellow Marines who didn't make it back. Corporal Charles McMahon and Lance Corporal Darwin Judge were both killed in the final hours of the war. For Potratz, this trip is personal. His Vietnamese wife and 4-year-old stepdaughter were helped out of the country by Lance Corporal Judge.
And he was a special kid. He was my hero that day.
For the more than 7,000 people evacuated from the U.S. Embassy in Saigon in those 2 days, the Marines guarding the compound may have been thought of as heroes. But they came home to a country divided over the war, and Potratz says that was hard to handle.
Yeah, we were sad. Yeah, we were rejected as veterans, but it was a sad war. It was the first one we technically lost. And the Americans they just wanted to put it behind them. They just wanted to put it behind them. And I guess you can't blame it, but it's something that stays with you.
Patty Lane, KPBS News.
Operation Frequent Wind was the largest helicopter evacuation in history. Many people who escaped the chaos of Saigon came right here to the deck of the USS Midway.
And in fact, the man in charge of making sure every single person landed safely showed me what it was really like to transform this carrier into a rescue center.
We pushed over the side 4 Hueys and 1 Chinook helicopter. If we didn't push the helos over the side to make a spot for them, those other helicopters with many people on board would have to have landed in the water. And of course, many people would have lost their lives.
But no one died, says 83-year-old Vern Jumper, air boss of the USS Midway, on that drizzling day, April 29, 1975, when the historic 2-day rescue mission, Operation Frequent Wind, began.
We rescued 3,073 refugees in a 30-hour period.
From 4 stories above the flight deck, the ship's air boss is an air traffic control commander.
But I stood right here watching everything.
Responsible for the lives of pilots and crew in the near heart-stopping launch and landing of aircraft on the carrier's tiny runway.
At one time, on the afternoon of the 30th, we counted 21 Huey helicopters circling the Midway, and we got every one of them aboard. Every one.
At just 3 football fields long, this was one of the busiest airports in the world. Aircraft touched down at 150 miles an hour in an area the size of a tennis court.
This was the most dangerous 30 hours I'd ever seen on an aircraft carrier.
Because?
Most of these helos that were landing were running out of fuel. If one of those helos would have crashed on the flight deck, we would have lost innumerable number of people would have lost their lives or been injured.
Then, as if the stakes weren't high enough, this stolen, small, 2-seater fixed-wing plane wobbled over the Midway's landing deck, twice, dropping notes that blew overboard.
He had no radio. We had no way to talk to him.
A desperate last note, stuffed into a leather gun holster, finally lands on the deck.
That note said, and I'm quoting now, "Can you move those helicopters to the other side? I can land on your runway. I can fly 1 more hour. We have enough time to move. Please rescue me." And he signed it, Major Bung, wife, and 5 child.
After the ship's choppers were moved, South Vietnamese pilot Major Buong Lee landed his young family safely, just 100 feet short of the ocean.
He did it.
In the following hours, about half of the refugees on the Midway were taken to nearby ships. The remaining 1,600, including many women and children, remained on board, with more than 3,000 sailors and personnel.
On the hangar deck, I had roughly 20 aircraft and just hundreds of refugees living underneath these aircraft. We found bubble wrap and blankets for them to lay on. And the sailors were playing with the kids. They were making toys for the kids. It was just beautiful.
But there were no safety ropes or rails on the decks.
We had little kids running all over this flight deck and hangar deck. But not one little kid went over the side. That in itself was a miracle.
But after all these years, Jumper's eyes still reveal the personal toll of making life and death decisions for thousands of people.
It was emotional, I have to admit that, because as I said, it was very dangerous and my heart was in my throat half the time. I was so frightened that one of those helos would crash on this flight deck, but it didn't happen.
Still, Jumper calls that day a sad end to the Vietnam War.
These poor people, and you could see the dread in their faces. Here they're leaving their homeland, all their worldly goods in a pillowcase. Little kids, just scared to death.
As for what it's like now to see generations who owe their lives to the mission he accomplished 40 years ago, Jumper humbly passes the buck.
And I send the praises, all the praises to the Vietnamese because they settled in our country and really became great citizens, hard-working people. They're successful, and I'm so proud of them.
When Saigon fell 40 years ago, the word refugee was not a part of the U.S. vernacular. Officially, the Vietnamese nationals who arrived here were called parolees.
Parolees, but the size and duration of the crisis shifted U.S. thinking on refugee resettlement. KPBS reporter Megan Burks has a look at that legacy through the lens of a Vietnamese family here in San Diego.
Families in cars stacked with surfboards cruise into the San Mateo campground on the northern edge of San Diego County. Clear skies beckon them for a weekend of beach camping. Drive inland for another 4 miles, and there's an entirely different kind of camp.
You're at Camp Talega, the northernmost camp on Camp Pendleton.
Faye Jonason runs museums on this military base. She's showing off tidy rows of Quonsets, half-round bunk rooms made of corrugated metal.
Hello, anybody here? Okay, so what you're looking at is a squad bay, and it's modern. They've modernized everything. They've repainted it. They've got new beds. So it's not anything like it was for the refugees.
In April 1975, the first 1,000 Vietnamese refugees from Saigon flew into the El Toro Marine Corps base nearby. They were then bused here.
You're figuring you're housing 1,000 people. That means restrooms, bath, bathing facilities, eating facilities, places to sleep.
Troops had just 6 days to set up 8 of these mini cities on the base. Over 6 months, some 50,000 Vietnamese refugees passed through here. Most stayed about 3 months before American families took them in or helped them strike it out on their own.
This apartment here at 4212 Altadena Avenue is the first apartment that the family, about 32 people.
That's Quan Nguyen. He was 5 months old when his parents and extended family left those Quonsets and moved into this 2-bedroom apartment in the City Heights neighborhood of San Diego. Nguyen's parents giggle at the thought of so many people in that tiny place.
At that time, we are refugees in America. At least we have a place nice and clean to live at that time. And at least we have food to eat at that time. So everybody, no complaint.
Back then, the Nguyen's were the only Vietnamese family on the street. Today, people call the neighborhood's main drag Little Saigon. It's a cultural mashup where Somali women in headscarves and Burmese women holding parasols stroll past Vietnamese supermarkets and pagoda-style strip malls. Bob Montgomery headed the International Rescue Committee here for 15 years before retiring in March. He says the fall of Saigon built the City Heights of today.
Because of the services that grew up around the Vietnamese refugees that came out of Camp Pendleton, it was a good place to send people because we had established services. There was religious institutions, some Buddhist temples and other types of religious institutions that they could take advantage of. And of course, maybe most importantly, existing communities where they would feel most comfortable.
Nearly 45% of City Heights residents were born overseas, and last year, Montgomery's office resettled more than 900 refugees. The flow of refugees didn't end with the fall of Saigon. For years afterward, the IRC helped other refugees from Southeast Asia make homes here. And by 1980, Congress took that ad hoc system and made it permanent. That's why the State Department funnels refugees into City Heights today. Montgomery says the Iraqi and Burmese people arriving today can thank the Vietnamese who came here 40 years ago. They found their way, opened businesses, and prioritized education for their kids. Father Harry Nguyen says he didn't have any other choice.
At that time, I say this is my country now. I didn't think anything about Vietnam that time because at that time it's collapsed already and under communism, something under control. So my mind not over there, over here. And everything I concentrate here and take care of family, take care of children. I go to work, and we have a beautiful life here.
Over dinner in his ample suburban home, son Quan Nguyen says the path isn't yet complete. The pharmacist and father of 2 says his generation is looking at more than the family unit. Nguyen says he'd like to see the Vietnamese community better represented in government. Last year, voters in Orange County elected for the first time a Vietnamese American to the California State Senate. And Nguyen has this. His sister is working for the California Republican Party, reaching out to Asian American voters. Megan Burks, KPBS News.
Now, TripAdvisor ranks the Midway as the 7th most popular museum of all museums in the U.S. The honor is largely because of the volunteer docents who bring the ship's legacy to life.
USS Midway was America's longest-serving aircraft carrier of the 20th century. I got a personal tour from one of the original volunteers who brought this warship to San Diego more than 10 years ago. What does that 41 represent on the Midway ship?
Well, 41 means Midway in 1945 was the 41st carrier built by this country. Today, as many San Diegans know across the bay, the USS Ronald Reagan is 76. It was the 76th carrier built. That's the way the Navy keeps track of its ships.
We are on the Midway, and Scott McGaugh is our tour guide today. Scott, what else are we going to see?
Well, first of all, we're going to see how San Diegans are honoring the 58,300 Americans who gave their lives in Vietnam. Then we're going to explore the flight deck, the busiest airport in the world in its day. We're going to go down below and see how Midway is honoring the greatest generation from World War II. And finally, even lower, to the floating city at sea, population 4,500, all living inside 3 football fields.
Excellent. Let's go take a look. Scott, these yellow ribbons were placed by visitors who've come recently to the Midway. What do they represent?
Well, they represent the 58,300 Americans who made the ultimate sacrifice in Vietnam. In just the last 2 weeks, thousands of San Diegans as well as groups have come aboard to pay tribute.
So this is the Buckeye. This is the plane that naval pilots trained in?
Yes, this is a trainer. This would be typically the kind of jet aircraft that an aviator would learn how to fly and perhaps be the first jet he would land aboard Midway. And when he did, he was landing at 150 miles an hour, not on a 3 football field long flight deck, but inside the dimensions of a tennis court, and he was aiming for the net and coming to a stop in 3 seconds.
And of course, the Midway was the first naval ship to carry nuclear weapons back in the day, right?
Absolutely right. And in fact, Midway was really a pioneer in naval aviation. It was the first American carrier with a steel flight deck, the first carrier with an angled flight deck, the first carrier to carry nuclear weapons and the aircraft large enough to carry those weapons in the late 1940s. It even helped pioneer autopilot technology in the 1960s that we all take for granted, from our vehicles to the space shuttle.
Headed towards the galley or restaurant area.
And a sailor,
tight spaces.
Very tight, 2,000 rooms. It took some real knowledge to understand exactly how to get around on this ship.
And watch your head. You've described below deck, the galley area or restaurant, as a city at sea. Why?
Well, with 4,500 men on board, only about 300 on average were pilots. The other 4,200 had city-like jobs down here, so 300 could fly. There were bakers and cobblers and cooks and electricians and welders and plumbers and postal clerks, all working so that an airport could operate. Here in the galley, in one of 6 restaurants, the cooks prepared 10 tons of food a day, 13,000 meals a day. And when our guests come aboard, our great docent corps really brings that story to life, really makes it a much more personal experience for all our guests.
The docents were sailors themselves at some point, most of them.
Yes, absolutely. The vast majority serve in the Navy, with 400 docents volunteering their time. They are truly a big part of the success of Midway. The vast majority serve in the Navy. Many of them served on aircraft carriers. Some of them even served or flew off of Midway. So when you come aboard Midway, it's a very personal experience.
Welcome aboard the Midway, sir.
That brings it to a level that all ages can really enjoy and appreciate, not just the airport.
6 minutes that changed the world, Battle of the Midway. This is the newest attraction, the theater here. Also, what the ship was named after. Tell us more.
Well, many people assume that Midway fought at the battle. It did not. It was named for the Battle of Midway. And in listening to our guests, that we always do, we realized we needed to explain that significance, explain the entire story of the battle, its significance. It's the greatest victory in World War II in the Pacific. So we opened the theater a few weeks ago. It's proven very popular, a 15-minute film with holographic figures, characters. We meet the boiler tenders, the cooks, the pilots. I'm not going to give you a spoiler alert in terms of what ultimately happens, but it's proving to be a very inspirational experience to kick off your visit to Midway.
And this floating museum has proved to be a very welcoming experience for visitors.
Yes, you know, I was privileged to be part of the group of volunteers that brought Midway to San Diego. We never dreamed that in 10 years we would be hosting 1.2 million visitors a year, that our audio tour would be available in 5 foreign languages.
And here's a look at some of the activities here on the Midway for the next few days, marking the 40th anniversary of the Fall of Saigon.
And again, tomorrow at 10 a.m., The Wall That Heals opens for public viewing. It'll be open 24 hours a day, free of charge.
On Sunday, the 26th, there will be a commemoration of Operation Frequent Wind. There will be activities from 10 in the morning until 3 in the afternoon.
And on Monday morning at 11, there will be a reading of the names of San Diego County veterans who died in Vietnam and in the wars since then.
The wall will close for public viewing on Thursday at 5 p.m. Of course, you can find more about this weekend's activities on the Midway Museum's website, midway.org.
And you can see all of our stories online at kpbs.org/Vietnam.
We just want to take a quick moment to thank everyone here at the Midway Museum for hosting us here on the flight deck for this special broadcast.
And our special thanks to veterans and people who shared their stories of the last days in Vietnam.
Our thanks to you as well for tuning in. Have a great weekend, and we'll see you again on Monday.
Good night.